On behalf of the South African TA Association, I'm delighted, Keith, to welcome you yet again. You really feel like an old friend for many of us. We're delighted that you're happy to share with us again. Your thinking is always sparking new things. And I think it would be remiss not to, on behalf of the SATAA, congratulate you and your good mate, Graham Summers. Keith and Graham have been awarded the 2020 Eric Byrne Memorial Award for their work on co-creative TA. And it's really, your original article was a long time ago in 2000, and we're now in 2020. But I know it's informed so many people. It's certainly a key sense of my beingness in the work that I do. So thank you and congratulations. And yeah, we're looking forward to spending time with you again. Over to you.
Oh, well, Tanakwe Rangatira, greetings to the Karen leader and Hoa Mahi colleague and Hoa friend. Thank you for that warm welcome. Yes, I think this is the third year running that I've done this, and feels like a regular booking, and I've enjoyed all the sessions, and so happy to be with you. Seems strange that I've never visited South Africa. I would love to come sometime, but this is, you know, next best thing. And thank you for your warm wishes. It's a great honor, and people have been congratulating me since they found out, and particularly since the with the announcement in the script. And I had a very warm and full welcome from a Māori colleague who, you know, gave a big kōrero speech in Māori, te reo Māori, and I just online, and I just felt overwhelmed. And I suppose it reminds me that as much as I'm honoured, I'm also very humbled by the fact that so many people have read the article and find it useful, and it really speaks to something. And I think, you know, you and a few other people have mentioned the sort of slow burn, you know, because when you look at the history of the awards, people usually get things within sort of 3 to 5, maybe 7 years, and this is a slow burn. But I don't really know quite what to make of that. But I do know that I feel proud of the fact that it has provided something for TA in all fields of application, and it's been really picked up by people in many cultures, and that those two things really warm my heart, gladden my heart. So thank you for your acknowledgement, and that's a lovely start to the evening. So I would like, in a way, want to sort of put it back to you, because I want to honour the kaupapa or the protocol of your meetings in these occasions. So it would be nice to, you know, for people to introduce themselves, say something to reconnect with each other and with me, perhaps anything that brings them to this particular webinar on OKness. I know you've got a theme for the year, and I think that would be a good way to start. It also might catch the latecomers, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to do, which is essentially to do a bit of screen sharing and go through some ideas, and then invite you to have a discussion, and then maybe have a sort of bit of a second presentation as well. So yeah, I'd like to invite you to find a way to join and check in and do any processing that you need to do, or any requests, or and as I say, it's helpful for me to sort of gauge, apart from this being one of a series of seminars about your topic, you know, what your thoughts are about, you know, okayness still being okay, which as ever, because of my interest in criticality, has a well, the subtitle says it, you know, it's a critical perspective. So I'm interested to invite your critiques as well. And Kirsty, you'll be keeping an eye on who's coming in and so on. So if, you know, get to a point where I'm not quite sure if everybody's, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 11 of us, plus me. I make it. Anyway, so feel free to say hello.
Hello, Keith. Oh, well, I just wanted to say hello and congratulations. And I'm also quite surprised that it's been has it really been a year since your last CTA webinar, which I was on? It feels like yesterday, so I'm quite amazed. But just really happy to be back here with you and to have this opportunity to meet up from all over the place. It's really lovely. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, Keith, it's wonderful to see you again, and also to be in the space with everybody, and I'm happy to see some new faces. It's always lovely to connect with old and new people. I think coming into this session today, quite looking forward to the topic. I think what we're noticing in going on with the global pandemic and many other social issues that have been riled up over the couple of months. Quite interested to see what new insights I can take from our discussion today into that.
Thank you, Andrew.
Hi, Keith. This is Johan Cronier. Can you hear me?
Kia ora, Johan, yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, yep.
Okay, I'm particularly interested in the topic. I work with corporate teams, and my interest is really in the area of how to assist people in this sort of dimension from a very practical point of view, because I somehow deal with companies that's rather technical, engineering companies and the like. I've been involved with teams and teamwork for over 35 years. So this is an important aspect of the process that I use, because I use TA in the teams from a communications perspective. So I'm looking forward to your webinar or your topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. I appreciate you reminding us of the practical, and I guess I often find myself balancing that with the philosophical. So I think there'll be elements of both, and maybe tensions between the two, but we'll see. See where we get to by the end.
Morning, everyone. Alex here from stormy Western Cape. It's really been coming down today, and I'm loving it. I'm really glad to see Margarita again, and Keith, you as well. It's been quite a while. And Sharon, I'm so glad you managed to get on the call. And to see Nicholas Steenkamp, who I've worked with a little bit before, and Jayashri, and everyone really. So many faces. It's wonderful that we can connect again in this way. I'm looking forward to what this webinar brings, because I really think it speaks to something we're experiencing quite intensely in the world, particularly now. So it's coming at just the right time.
Good to see you again, Alex. Thanks.
I'll go next. It's good to see you, Keith. I don't know whether you remember, I was there the last webinar.
I do remember you, yes.
Yeah. And congrats on your award, at least being nominated. And yes, where am I? In India, and going through all the challenges where other countries are going through, and also looking at the world where we are at with the social contract in question, and what is okay and what isn't okay is played out on the world stage. And so, yes, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say and the discussion. Looking forward to that. Thank you again for coming.
Good to see you again, Anand.
Hi, Keith. Jayashree here from Coimbatore. I
Hi.
hope you remember me from the last webinar.
I do, and I also remember Coimbatore.
Yes, I know you shared. Congratulations on your award. The topic was also what they gave today for today was very curious, creating curiosity for me. So is being okay still okay is something, yeah. I'm looking forward to what is going to emerge today. Yeah, definitely what's happening 2020 is, I think, has been a huge upheaval for all of us. So I feel that, I feel overwhelmed by what's happening everywhere and close also. Yeah, being a doctor and having friends on the front line, it's very close for me what's happening. And even before lot is happening, even in India a lot of things are happening, and in the world also. So I feel that it's been a very overwhelming feeling. Something, yeah. Sometimes I feel I am the Mother Earth. I don't know why I feel that I grieve for her so much. Yeah.
That's a beautiful way of putting of expressing your connection with the earth. Yeah.
I'll go next. Hi, Keith. It's really nice to see you again. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, because I also think this is a really interesting topic right now that we're all in the midst of. And congratulations on your award.
Thank you.
I'll say something, Keith, and hello, everyone. I'm interested to hear you talking about that juxtaposition of a philosophical approach and a practical approach. And I guess that's where I am. How do I think about okayness? I dipped into your article and was reminded of almost there've been sometimes kind of degrees of okayness. Some okayness is, with the question marks that some people have added about okay, question mark. So yeah, I'm very interested in thinking about it, but also what does it mean for me in my lived experience every day? How do I embody that in the depths of okayness, not the shades of okayness that have been around.
Lovely. Depth and shades. Nice. I'm already seeing some polarities or some, philosophy and practice, depth, shades, depth, width. Yeah.
I'll go next. Hi, Keith and everybody else. I'm Kirsty, a life coach in Cape Town, South Africa. For me, the idea of okayness, it's quite similar to what Anand and Karen have shared, where I'm all about putting things into practice. And I want to know how I can integrate all these ideas and philosophies into my lived experience every single day. And not just once off, but to really live it long term. So the more I can learn about that and have conversation about it, I think the more it'll be at the forefront of my mind, and the more I will begin to challenge myself to actually live it. So looking forward to today, and thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me back. I just want to pick up a bit on integration, because I think, I obviously talk a lot about integration in relation to the integrating adult, but I also talk quite a lot about critique. And I think sometimes we need to almost disintegrate, or we need to deconstruct and critique and say, well, wait a minute, we've got some contradictions in TA theory. And so that one of the things I want to draw out is some of the contradictions around okayness between existentialism and essentialism. So I don't think we can integrate everything. So I just wanted to pick up on that to sort of say that's partly where I'm coming from, is as I think I'm in a whole phase with TA. Well, I probably have been forever, but particularly of rereading, critiquing, deconstructing. So this is part of that project, which I'll say more about. So thank you for using the word integration, because it reminded me to say that.
Good morning. I'll put my name in there. Nicola from Cape Town. This is my first webinar, and I'm relatively new to TA along my coaching journey. And yeah, just very excited for the webinar and to kind of see how the discussion unfolds. So yeah, very grateful to be here, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you, and welcome, as this is your first time. So
thank you.
Cal, don't mind going next. My name is Clive, and I'm based in Johannesburg. I am a trainer and a coach, and relatively new to the Transactional Analysis Association, but I'm just here because I'm really, really keen to learn. So as much as I can absorb, I'm going to.
Great.
Hi, please, I'll go next. My name is Nicole. I'm also from South Africa. I live in Johannesburg, and I work in the NGO space, and I'm very interested from a TA perspective on what okayness means, which has come up already, and almost to be able to reflect on what that means for me in my role in supporting others. So I'm very excited to hear more and to have the opportunity to hear you talk as well. And yeah, it's lovely to be here, and congratulations.
Thank you. Susan, you look like you're about to.
Yes. Hello. Hello. Morning, evening, wherever you are in the day. I am very new to TA. Have had the pleasure of being one of Karen's students over a couple of years, and I'm really looking forward to, I think the word is integration, but also understand the sort of, get depths of the conversation going for me around TA and its application. I work in arts and culture, and I've found the frameworks around the coaching mechanism and coaching tools, and very specifically TA, very helpful in some of the teaching environments I find myself in. And yeah, so lovely to meet you, Keith, and everybody here today on the webinar. It's also quite new for me, and I'm managing my cell phone. For some reason, my laptop wouldn't let me in, so I'm scrolling on a laptop. I mean, on an iPhone.
Oh, it's on a phone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Good to meet you and have you with us.
Thank you.
So, Kirsty, I think that's it. Does that?
It seems to be it for now.
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Okay. And if people join, they join. That's fine. So I will now screen share and do a bit of my own introduction. So screen 2. Can you see the? Can you? That should say the theme. That should be the title page with is okayness
Yes.
still okay?
Yep.
Yes,
Yes,
all that. Great,
fine.
fantastic. So there you have Sata and your theme, which I want to acknowledge and honour. And I'm taking the yeah, the critical perspective. Some of you will know some of my writing and my more recent writing. By more recent, I said probably the last 10 years. It's tends to take a critical perspective. I was trained. My first degree was in philosophy and theology, so I'm sort of trained. Well, I think, well, actually, if I go back a bit further, my family upbringing was very liberal, and I was encouraged to think and to question, and then that led me to philosophy and theology, and so I sort of haven't looked back really. And I became a political activist. So, and I'm sort of tending to own that more. I just wrote a book a couple of years ago on psychotherapy, a critical perspective, in which I advanced a critique of most of psychotherapy from generic psychotherapy, and I'm currently in the middle of a book on looking at TA and yeah, looking critically at the fundamental the philosophical underpinnings and the what we sometimes refer to as the 4 pillars of TA: transactions, ego states, scripts, and games. So this is sort of partly in this tradition, and it's based on an article I wrote some years ago in which I advanced, I questioned the I'm okay, you're okay position as the sort of fundamental life position, and advanced the argument that we are is a more fundamental life position, which many of you will be familiar with in terms of I am because of we are, and Ubuntu, and some of the ideas that I'm familiar with in Te Ao Māori. So that's a bit of a preamble, but if I then go to say kia ora koutou, I believe that those are most of the ways that you say hello in South Africa, in Rainbow Nation. I'm going to start with, I was thinking, Jayashri, what you said about your connection with Mother Earth. I'm going to offer you what we call a pipiha here, which is a Māori way of introducing oneself, and I'll do the translation and say a little bit about why I do it. But it's certainly a way of welcoming and introducing myself to a group. I know some of you will have seen some of this before, some of you won't, but it's certainly the way that many of us who engage in a bicultural dialogue with Indigenous people in this country like to introduce ourselves. So I was doing this slightly the wrong way around, but this is basically what we're going to cover. So I'm going to do an introduction. You've done your introductions. I'm going to do mine. We're going to talk a little bit about beginnings of okayness, origins, nature, scope, 4 ideas that I have about okayness, some discussion, perhaps another conversation about language, and some more discussion. So that's the sort of time structure. So ko Helvellyn te Monga. So the first thing I say is my mountain is Helvellyn, which is a mountain in the Lake District. When I heard the form of the pepeha, and we, as a new immigrant 10 years ago, sort of said, "Oh, what's my mountain?" I knew immediately what my mountain was, and it's this mountain where I used to walk, as I've walked this mountain since I was 5 years old, and that's 60 years ago. And both my parents, their ashes are scattered just on the edge of the tarn, and so that's a very meaningful mountain. There's another little twist to it, because it's the 3rd highest mountain in the English Lake District, and I sometimes refer to myself as the 3rd highest mountain in my family, because I'm the youngest of 3 boys, and I'm very engaged in humanistic psychology, which is the 3rd force psychology. So there's a bit of a theme of 3s in my family. So ko Helvellyn te Monga, ko Don te Awa. So my river is the River Don that flows through Sheffield, both in its more natural origins and in its more industrial origin. It was a river that was very important in terms of the Industrial Revolution and Sheffield becoming a major steel city. Ko Waka ko waka oranga te waka, which means, so the third part of this introduction, you say what your mountain is, your river is, and your canoe. The waka or the canoe is a reference to the vessels on which Māori came to Aotearoa. And so my waka is Waka of Health, and this is an organisation, a Māori-led organisation that I'm an associate member of. And it both represents my interest and commitment to improving Māori health in this land, but it also has a political undertone in terms of part of my bicultural engagement being a willingness to take leadership for Māori, and even, introducing myself in Māori first. Ko inga rehi nā werehi nā iwi, so I have English and Welsh ancestry. That's the village where my earliest ancestor comes from. Ko Tudor te hapu, that's my sub-tribe, is the family of Tudor. Ko Luan Tudor he tangata, so my oldest relative that I've investigated goes back to the 17th century in Wales, and that's the genealogy on the male side. He tangata tiriti aho. This is a statement that I make when I start saying that's my background, but here in New Zealand, I'm describing myself as a person of the treaty. So I'm saying, even though I wasn't there in 1840, I'm signing up for what Te Tiriti means, because this is a very important document in terms of the history of colonisation. It was the only time that the British actually signed a document with Indigenous people, and it's much disputed. The British Crown basically tore it up, but it's had a real revitalisation, and what the articles of Te Tiriti are known by people and engaged with, particularly in the public health sector. So I say, he tangata tiriti aho, here I am a person of the treaty. Ko nā wai o horotu ko whaiora ko awataha nā marae. These are 3 marae that I have, which are Māori meeting houses that I have particular associations with, and that I have been gifted the the permission, if you like, to claim my association with those marae, which is very much based on relationship, which is actually the first article of Te Tiriti. Kei Sheffield kei Ingarangi aho, I'm from Sheffield in the UK. Kei Titarangi kei Waitakere aho e noho ana, which is the village, looking out from the village where I live in West Auckland. And finally I say ke whenua o te kawero amaki taku kainga inaine, which means that my house sits on the tribal land of Kawero Amaki, and this is a visitor centre, an art centre, literally a couple of miles up the road, which is the centre of the presentation of what the iwi, local iwi. It's not exactly a meeting house, but it's where they present their tribal history. So that also positions me in terms of saying my relationship to the land, that I acknowledge that I'm literally sitting on their land. In fact, you can see I'm in a garage. I live in a pole house, so I'm literally, there's the floor and then a pole that goes directly into the ground. So I actually feel very grounded as I'm sitting here talking with you. So that's who I am here. I also did want to make some connections with South Africa, because in my training, I trained at the Metanoia Institute in the UK in Ealing, West London, and I had the privilege of working closely with all 3 founders who were South African immigrants to the UK. Patricia Clarkson, who perhaps is the most famous, people will have heard of her work. She was an extraordinary woman, sadly took her own life, and that's something that is perhaps not very much talked about in the community. But anyway, I'd certainly want to mihi, or to honour her. Sue Fish, who was Patriska's partner for many years, who was, that's a lovely picture of her. She was full of life and energy. Sadly, also no longer with us. She died of leukemia. And Brian Dobson, who was a clinical psychologist and child psychotherapist, and also sadly no longer with us. But I had the great privilege to work with them, each of them, in different professional relationships from the early 80s to early 90s. And they were very seminal in terms of my development. So Kita mihi aho, kia koutou, my greetings to them, my acknowledgements to them. And the other South African connection, which is very topical and very topical, because it's only came out yesterday. So this is Alana Lee, who is our president of the ITAA, who is also from South Africa, now lives in Australia via Metanoia, where I met her. And I don't know if you are all members of the ITAA, but whether you are or whether you aren't, she put out a letter yesterday. Yeah, was it yesterday or the weekend? Anyway, very recently, in the last week. And I wanted to put that statement up because I think it's an astonishing statement. I sometimes am pretty grumpy, pretty critical and grumpy about how conservative the TA community is, but I really appreciate her and the TA, ITAA Council, basically saying, we are standing against racism, so we're taking an positively anti-racist position, very much linked to the popular phrase, which she extends, you'll notice, to not just I'm okay, you're okay, but we're okay, they're okay, in the plural. And we need to ensure that this is not simply a slogan, but a challenging, meaningful and transformational guide to action. So I think that, if you don't remember anything else, it's like, well, that says it all really. I'm going to go into some detail, but I think that's great. Links to a professional, that it's a professional ethical stance, and also is reflective. I love those last two paragraphs where, she says, well, many of our members are people of color, but this is not true in those countries where white supremacy and colonialism originated. We have in New Zealand, I think we have 60 members of the TA Association. I think that I'd say only a handful, maybe 5 are Māori, and maybe a couple of Asian colleagues. That's about it. So, we still have a lot of work to do, and I like that last paragraph sentence. We undertake to renew and deepen our work in the direction of ensuring more diverse and equitable access to membership of the ITAA. So I thought that was very topical, and partly, again, another South African connection for me, and because Ilana is not only president, but a good colleague and friend. And she's doing me the courtesy of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to present me with the award online in a couple of weeks' time. So yeah, Tanakwe, Elana. And I thought a good start for our Kororo discussion. So I want to get into in a sense, maybe to take probably the next 20 minutes, maybe a bit longer, to go through a sort of what I hope is a bit of a logical sequence of argument or of background, and then we'll pause for some discussion. And as a general, I can't see everybody, and if anybody else new has joined, welcome to you. We'll say hello. I think there's somebody nodding at the bottom of my screen, so hello. So in terms of beginnings, the concept of okayness in the very first article, which is back in Byrne's article on classification of positions in 1966, okayness is linked to this idea of positions, and what he means by positions is subjects of polarities. So he says, he wrote in his original article, the subjects of all positions are particulars of the polarity I, others. So whether we're talking about he, she, we, the planet, whatever, from Byrne in 1962, actually, it's not 66, my apologies, he said everything is I, other. And in that formulation, I included we and you. I included we and you included they. So the position I, other, I, you is singular and plural, essentially. Some 10 years later, in his the book that was published posthumously, he shifted this somewhat by extrapolating they as a third person position distinct from the second person. So he then had I'm, in effect, I'm okay, you're okay, they're okay, and the other 7 permutations of that. If you put positive and negative, you get 8 permutations. I'm quite excited by that, and I maintain my excitement despite the fact that I remember talking about this with Claude Steiner, and actually this is also on the web somewhere. We did a workshop at San Francisco conference. I think you were there, Karen, and I said I was very excited by this third-handed position because it seemed to me to represent much more connection with the social world. And I remember Claude, in a rather grumpy way, was saying, I don't think it's not at all interesting. I'm not at all excited about it. And I sort of maintained, my excitement. I think the idea of they challenges a sort of cozy we-ness, because I can say, look, I'm okay, you're okay, but those people over there aren't, which I think is one way of, from a positional perspective, maybe understanding things like, oppression and racism and so on. We can be okay in our comfortable, lockdown position, but they're not over there. So I think that to hold them positively while we're dealing with I and you is interesting and challenging. And I might say more about that in terms of a particular clinical example. So those are the beginnings. The origins of the term okayness, this actually isn't in the article, but I'm not sure if I left it out the article deliberately or not, but I've subsequently rediscovered this. The origin of the word okay is discussed in the Transactional Analysis Journal in an early article by somebody called Sudholter, in which she says that it derives from the Democratic Party's OK Club, which they set up in 1840, and was named after Old Kinderhook, which was President Van Buren's birthplace. So President Van Buren, Martin Van Buren, was born in Old Kinderhook, and when he was going through, he already was president and was going through, the elections for re-election, the party decided to sort of say, okay, we're going to set up an Old Kinderhook OK Club. And so it has, political origins. The original term means a haven for children, which I think is interesting. Some newspapers at the time attributed the meaning as all correct or all correct. And in an interesting comment, I think, in the TAJ article, Sudhalter says there was she feels that at that time there was a new assertion abroad that one person was as good as another, a notion that signaled the decline of the gentleman and the rise of plain people. So there's this sort of, I guess in British politics terms, it would be the old sort of Whigs and Tories, the Liberals and the Conservatives, and a sense that, politics was for the people. And so I think that's quite an interesting sort of political background to the idea of okayness is a sort of political leveler as well as maybe a psychological leveler. So I thought I'd share those origins. So okayness itself forms part of what is commonly taken as the basic philosophy of transactional analysis. This is probably where I start getting a little bit, getting my old philosophy books out. And, I think that TA traditionally has been a bit light on philosophy. If we think about, when people say what's TA basic philosophy, it's that people are okay, people are born okay, people have the capacity to think unless they have, organic, disorder or whatever, and that they can redecide. And I think that that's pretty light for philosophy. I tend, if I think about philosophy, I think about philosophical traditions like existentialism and phenomenology and pragmatism, all of which I think are underneath a lot of TA. But at this stage, I'd say that, and certainly acknowledge that okayness, in the way that we usually mean it, you know, I'm okay, you're okay, is seen as part of the basic philosophy of TA. As a concept, it's been widely discussed in the literature. When I did the background for the article on We Are, I mean, there's a stack of articles, and of course there's the I'm okay, you're okay book by Thomas Harris. And so there's a lot of information about okayness, and what I did in the article was to organize it into 4 categories. So the first category is the nature of okayness. What does it comprise? What do different people say about it? I talk a little bit about the scope of okayness, because it actually has more than one scope. And then this is the more grunty philosophical stuff that I want to at least present and get into a little bit, is, you know, okayness as existential, because it's often referred to as an existential life position, and okayness as essentialist, which is actually almost the opposite of existentialism. So this is where I'm beginning to look at, you know, some of the philosophical fault lines in TA. So the nature of okayness. Burns' hypothesis was that we fix on one life position, and that this represents a pervasive attitude, and on that we base our life scripts. So it's significant in terms of linking to script theory, and whether we operate from an I'm okay, you're okay position, or a one up position, I'm okay, you're not okay, or a one down position, or a both down, despairing position, I'm not okay, you're not okay. Harris, who took Burns' work on, and Burns wasn't terribly happy about, because he disagreed with Burns, but that book was more popular than some of Burns' article writing. He also viewed okayness as a decision, but argued that the first position was I'm not okay, you're okay, and that the other 3 positions are unconscious early decisions, and the I'm okay, you're okay being a later conscious verbal decision. And that completely turned Burns' idea of being, you know, born okay, that we're born princes and princesses, on its head, which he wasn't very happy about. By contrast, Ernst, who developed the OK chorale into a grid, what he called a get on with grid, he argued that okayness shifts from moment to moment. So it's not a life position, it's not a fundamental life position, but it's more of a behavioral choice position. Kayla later identified the 3 not okay positions as behavioral. Karen, you referred earlier to the question mark, the sort of development, and that's Tony White, who used the sign, the question mark sign, to alter one of Burns' original positions, and came up, I think, with, you know, 7 different positions, which I think are quite fun in a way, you know, like I'm not okay, but you're worse, which is, you know, there's some nice nuances there. And Kai Harley, who's also contemporary, I think, of Alana's at Metanoia, linked okayness to Klein's positions, and argued that the not okay positions are important developmentally and must be worked through and integrated in order for the 4th position to be more than superficial and conditional. So you get this really different ideas about whether you start okay, whether okay is an end, sort of almost a teleological thing, whether you have to go towards. The Kleinian idea about the sort of necessary, you know, paranoid schizoid split, and then working through the depressive position and so on. Very different idea than Burns, and they're all in TA. So this is one of my cautions. It's a similar caution about ego states, and people say, oh, well, what do you think, you know, parent, adult, child, or whatever? And one of my perspectives is it depends on your definition of ego states. So the nature of okayness depends on your definition of okayness and which one you're signing up for. The other thing is that okayness is referred to as probably most often referred to as a psychological position, and this is true of the work of Muriel James and Elizabeth Yongerward, as well as Claude Steiner, but it's also seen as a total life direction or destiny in Burns' last book. It's also seen elsewhere in Steiner's work as a conviction and a faith in human nature. And that's a very interesting phrase, because some of you may be aware I wrote an article last year, I had published an article about religion, faith and spirituality in TA. And in that I point out that there's quite a lot of language around in TA that talks about a belief in theory and a faith in this case, human nature. And both belief and faith are sort of kind of religious words. And some of us who are perhaps more trained to be a bit more skeptical, take issue with this idea. Well, it's not, theory isn't a belief, it's more a series of propositions that, or a story about the world. So it's not a question of believing in theory or having a faith in human nature, but clearly some people do. So Steiner had this idea of okayness is about having a sort of broad optimistic faith in human nature. And Pearl Drago talks about planetary okayness. So even if you think about, what okayness encompasses in TA, it's a whole lot of different things. So then, in terms of reading the literature, I really wanted to explore this idea of, and a common claim that okayness is existential, and particularly it's embodied in this idea of, oh yes, I'm okay, you're okay, is an existential life position. So I want to subject this to a little bit of investigation. So as I put it there, the positions or life positions are frequently referred to as existential life positions, which according to Steiner are feelings about oneself and others. Steiner was very big on feelings. He's the founder of emotional literacy, so he's every right to say that, but I'm not sure if I agree with him. Kahler argued that only the I'm okay, you're okay position is existential. By contrast, Barnes, Graham Barnes, who viewed all four positions as an attitude or an existential stance and not an emotional or psychological state. He also made an interesting comment, I thought, that the three negative positions are existential in that they describe the social order that in the best of families is far from the ideal or the reality of the existential position of okayness. So he would say they're all existential. But I suggest, and this was some of the central piece of the article, that the existential statement encapsulated in the use of the verb to be is simply I am, you are, she is, he is, we are, etc. The attribution of okayness or not okayness is in effect a value judgment. So the phrase I'm okay comprises, in my view, an existential statement, which is I am, and a value judgment, or sometimes I refer to it as a humanistic gloss. It's okayness. It's general sort of benevolent value judgment on my being or your being. And Charlotte Sills, who's another person who trained at Metanoia and actually one of my trainers and now a friend and colleague, she put it succinctly we were talking about this many years ago, 2001. She said that okayness is a humanistic influence on the existential position. So I want to attribute that to her. One of the other problems with okayness is that it is binary. A person is, or is rather viewed as, either okay or not okay. And for me, it's a polarity that doesn't allow for the more sort of subtle, ambiguous or ambivalent expressions of ourselves or evaluation of ourselves. And in that sense, I think Tony White's use of the question mark and the double positive and the double negative is helpful. And I think the other issue here is that I think that the saying that people are okay is sometimes used as I put it, wittingly or unwittingly, as an avoidance of the existential face-to-face encounter. The philosophical version of Burns' intimacy experiment. And in the article, I just offer this little vignette, which comes from an example from a therapy group that I ran, a training group that I ran. So in this particular training group, there was one member who was consistently late. And, you know, most people have been pretty understanding about that, saying it's okay, we understand, you're looking after yourself. But eventually, I had a sense that some people were less than happy with this regular lateness. But eventually another member of the group said, actually, it's not okay. But interestingly, followed that up immediately with, I miss you. I want you to be here. I want you to be here with us on time. I want to experience you the whole of the day, not just sort of a part of you or part of the day. And in debriefing the exchange, the person who had been coming late said that what had most impacted him was when this colleague had said, I miss you. It was an I-you moment in which the parties were in effect naming an I am, you're not here relationship. And so I think that sometimes this sort of, oh, it's okay, you know, it's okay, and it sort of gets us into ideas about permissions as well, which I've also written about. You know, it's okay to be late, it's okay not to be late, it's okay to be anxious, it's okay not to be anxious. Misses the actual existential encounter. And the other thing, also, here's another thought. If we adopt a client-centered thou-I position, why wouldn't we place the you before the I? We tend to start with I, you, but that's also implicitly prioritizing ourselves rather than the other. I got this idea from Peter Schmidt, who's a person-centered, an Austrian colleague, person-centered colleague, who talked about Buber's I-thou relationship with God, that he has then become sort of interpreted as part of as a way of understanding the therapeutic relationship. And he talks about thou-I. If you really other focused, then you talk about thou first. So that's another critique, that if we are going to be existential and client-centered, we might start saying you're okay, I'm okay, rather than the other way around. However, just as we settled into some ideas about existentialism, which at best is very much, particularly European existentialism, is about, you know, life and death and angst and, you know, all sorts of things, and living in the moment and, you know, present moment and so on. We also have this tradition in TA where okayness is seen as essentialist. In other words, it's describing the essence of somebody, which is, from philosophical perspective, absolutely contrary to existentialism, because existentialists would be talking about the nature of existence and whether even you can say I exist and you exist and so on, whereas the essentialists are saying there is something essential about, you know, human beings, the table, the screens, whatever. So there's also this second set of definitions in okayness in TA that represents this this philosophical tradition of essentialism, which goes back to Plato and Aristotle and so on, that the idea that there are attributes, that there are intrinsic attributes. And in effect, so this is where I pull out another strand of thinking. So some of what Barnes says, for instance, about I'm okay as a statement of essence, he says it very clearly, this is a statement of essence that affirms the humanity, worth, dignity, and the right each person has to live and grow by virtue of the fact that he or she exists. So, you know, I don't have an issue with where that statement is going in terms of its sort of talking about, right, you know, if you like, humanity, worth, dignity, and rights, and Graham Barnes is very much on that. You know, he would be, you know, supportive of, you know, social responsibility, social justice, and so on. But my issue is whether it is an essence, whether it is an intrinsic essence, and whether that's a helpful way to think about it. Similarly, Stewart and Joins, in their work on their original book on TA Today, defined okayness in terms of the essential value that one perceives in oneself and others. Di Salters, a colleague of yours, wrote about okayness as a way of experiencing oneself and others in the world, and a statement as a statement of belief about the intrinsic value of human beings that is shared by many cultures. And this is also reflected in descriptions of okayness in terms of qualities such as strength, power, and dependency, which is in Thomas and Amy Harris's original book, second book on okayness. Having three aspects of thinking, feeling, and doing, which is from Tony White, and from Alan Jacobs, talking about, meaning that I'm fair with myself and fair with others. I see myself and others as equal, that is, with equal rights. It's a moral position. So for Alan Jacobs, okayness is very much a moral position. So I will stop sharing because I've said enough. Hopefully that's got some juices flowing. Over to you. Any thoughts, reactions, questions, statements, disagreements, new theory, curiosities? Somebody mentioned being curious.
One of the things that came up for me was the practice at a university in the US, which until a couple of years ago involved Black students not coming to the university for a period of time in order to demonstrate the significance of their position or their existence by means of their absence.
Mm.
And I linked that, so the university was evergreen, and unfortunately things blew up there in a bad way when that practice changed a bit. And what you just talked about reminded me of that in terms of existential positions and about I am, you are.
Yeah.
By taking away the I am by their absence, I think to others it demonstrated that they don't exist anymore. I think that's a very powerful display, maybe. I'm not sure if that's necessarily the right word.
It is a very powerful demonstration, a powerful statement, isn't it? And I appreciate the way you're thinking about it. It's sort of, I think where I go to is like that, the presence of absence. Like if you've got black students there and then they're not there, it's like it really faces white people, non-black people. It makes us face, well, yeah, who are they? Where are they? Who are we? It also has that flavour of challenging cultural neutrality, doesn't it? Because black becomes exotic or the other or culture, and makes people face that. It also reminds me of debates here about that some Māori have about there's a classical thing about there aren't enough Māori psychotherapists, so we should try and recruit them and train them, and they can work with their communities or other communities or whatever. But all of that presupposes that that psychotherapy has anything to offer to Māori, and Māori would want to be psychotherapists or do psychotherapy. And in some ways, I think there was a Māori, not a non-psychotherapist, but somebody who was a very great thinker who wrote an article saying Māori psychotherapy, an oxymoron. Just said it's a Western concept. You can't yes, you have brought it here and there's 500 of you, but actually it's not the way we think. And so why would we engage with it unless it's going to change radically? So in that sense, as you were talking, Alex, I was thinking, oh, you know, it's a bit like, well, some Maori wouldn't want to train. It's like it's not good enough. Their absence is also present. So it's lovely, a poignant example. I think we do need the other to face ourselves.
So it's so interesting because the situation at Evergreen blew up when it was proposed that instead of Black students choosing to make themselves absent, that they stay and white students actually leave the university. And there was objection to that because it was no longer choice, but it was exclusion. And when you were talking about in terms of a percentage of representativity of a demographic in a profession like psychotherapy or whatever it is, there's an important, but I think subtle but important difference. Is there a lack of a demographic by exclusion or by choice?
Yes.
And where's the origin of the phrase "there aren't enough"?
Yes.
Is that something that's being imposed on people, which to me again speaks to a colonialist mindset? And these are, to me, at least, nuances which are so important because they influence what happens on the psychological level.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it's a very live discussion. We have a community korero, which means a community conversation every Wednesday, and of course it's been online. It involves 90 students and staff, and across all psychotherapy programs. And there was a conversation today led by a Pacific Island student who's in a minority, saying, you know, I think psychotherapy should be more diverse. And you know, it's easy to nod and say, oh yes, of course that's right. And I've spent 10 years of my life here, you know, trying to make it more diverse and open, and appointing Māori staff and Pacific Island staff and so on. But they're not coming in great numbers. And I think there are bigger questions as to, well, is it what they might want to do? Is it relevant? The teaching sometimes I think is contradictory to different cultures or the values of different cultures. So it does feel like a sort of almost a colonial way of thinking, and it gets internalized in people who've been colonized. Andrew's dying to come in, so I do want to bring you in, and let's make this a discussion rather than a question and answer.
My original point is just a comment, and then I actually want to tag on to what Alex had introduced.
Yeah.
So I was struck by your input, Keith, of how as you laid out each slide, it felt quite solid and sound. And then as you move to the next slide, it's almost like the solidness got eroded. And you go, oh, well, what happened then? And so I was struck by how significant an agreed definition is when discussing each element, but then it's almost, we shift slide to a different concept, the definition then becomes the thing that's in question, and then it takes it to a deeper level. And so there's part of me that starts to think, well, like, when will we ever get to some place that's sound?
Yeah.
But then another part of me thinks, well, actually, that's great, because life is cyclical and we grow, and what was sound may not need to be sound anymore because we have to grow again. Each point becomes a springboard to the next, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I forgot what I wanted to add. Or if it pops up
well, yeah, I mean, what you've said is very profound, and maybe that's worth pausing on. I think it is. it's partly my style and my interest in critique, and it's also partly my, I guess, a sort of academic investigator. I'm a bit of a, I love Sherlock Holmes stories. I sort of like the sort of detective investigator. Who said this when? And if you notice, everything is in chronological order. So Burns said that, then Harris said that, then somebody else said that, then somebody else said that, and it's often, recursive, and people are disagreeing with each other. And I encourage that my students, like, put things in chronological order if you're describing the history of ideas. Plato comes before Tudor, sort of thing. If I can put myself in that august company. But yeah, and I also think it's a sort of educational method. I mean, it is a bit of a sort of Platonic sort of critiquing dialogue, and I don't think this is one of my big disagreements with Claude Steiner. I said, look, Byrne put forward contradictory ideas about ego states in the same book, and this was the guy who founded this approach that we all studied, and many of us spent quite a few years of our lives dedicated to. I think it's not, I mean, in some ways I wish he'd had a better editor to point that out and say, look, do you really want to be saying these two different things? But given that he did, I think it behoves people who are interested enough in this stuff to track the ideas, and then to say, well, some people say this, some people say that. And it does seem to me different to say, if you think, and notice I said think rather than believe, if you think, we start off as I'm okay, you're okay, what difference does that make to your practice, compared with if you think you start off as I'm not okay, you're okay, and that once you're sort of worked through or enlightened or whatever, you get to I'm okay, you're okay. To me, those are very different starting and ending points, which must influence our practice. I do think it's worth, yeah. So
that part of your where you named that, I was what came to mind was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so with the basic model having 5 levels, and the first 1 to 4 being a deficit need based versus, I can't remember the language for the top with the self-actualization. It kind of, I was clicking then about maybe I can't remember the language around it, but the thinking where humanity originates from, born, and there could be a saber-toothed tiger behind a bush ready to eat you, so you need to it's probably a good thing to think that I'm not okay because I need to make sure that safety is created immediately. That was a connection that I made at that point.
Keith, I've got a question for you.
Yes.
How does...
I thought you might.
Hi, Keith.
Yes, I thought you might have a question. Yeah.
How do you position consciousness in relation to the whole dimension of okayness?
Consciousness and okayness. I'm not sure I do. I mean, if I think about consciousness in TA terms, I tend to think about ego states. What did you have some thinking about that? I mean, if you're clearly interested in consciousness.
Well, I am, as I said to you in the beginning, very much exploring possibilities of translating these types of ideas into practicalities. So and the two things that comes to mind is the issue of consciousness and experience. When I say I'm okay, and you okay, or whatever, surely there is an experience that I experience in the moment. And I can only be aware of that if there is a certain level of consciousness.
Yeah.
And there are different levels of consciousness as well, so to speak. So it is the process of almost like waking up, as it were, in a sense of when I experience that consciousness of I'm okay, you're okay, or not okay. It sounds to me as if that is a possibility of making it stay or being. It's not just a slogan. It's not just an idea out there. It is something that I do experience. That is the issue that I'm relating to.
Right. Okay. I think I'm a bit more on. So if I think about experience, see, I don't think we experience I'm okay, you're okay. What if I think about my experience of you? I noticed that I felt lively. I could say things like, I'm experienced, I'm enjoying your mind, and I felt like I wanted to sort of engage with you, be a little bit playful. But I'd say so. I could say those things about my experiencing of you and my experiencing of myself in relation to you. It almost feels like if I were to say I'm okay, you're okay, it feels like where did that come from? Where did that judgment of okayness come from? So I think in some ways I go with your experience, your interest in experience and experiential being and a certain level of consciousness that we're bringing to that. I'm just wondering where okayness comes in.
Yeah, well, but sorry to interrupt you there, but
no,
it's almost a saying is there are some folks who is not conscious of their experience.
Right.
If
and
I don't
not
know,
okay.
if I don't know that I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a level of consciousness.
Yes, right. So I think we feels like we're getting somewhere with experience and consciousness, but my question is still, where do we get this idea of okayness from and why, and is it helpful?
Well, that is where the issue of consciousness kicks in for me. It's like
right.
I even if you work from the perspective that says I am born okay, there's some point that I will become conscious of that through a variety of impacts and influences, etc., etc. But it seems to me that the issue of consciousness is a major issue here in terms of if I experience myself as I'm okay, that's just not a slogan. That's just not a theory. There has to be an experience. For instance, when I say I'm okay, surely there must be a feeling linked to it. There must be a way of viewing myself in relation to that position or that consciousness. But consciousness seems to be even with all these variations that you were mentioning, is that it's variations of consciousness. It seems to me.
Okay, I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think I'm disagreeing with you then, because I think I'm going experience first, informed by consciousness, and then evaluated, because I don't think, I'm questioning the statement, I'm born okay. I'm saying I'm born, that's my experience.
Yeah.
I can bring some consciousness to that. I'm adding a third dimension, if you like, which is the valuing, the evaluative statement of okayness. So I'm with you with experience. I'm with you with levels of consciousness, and that's maybe another webinar. But it's the sort of imposition or the assumption of the valuing of okayness and not okayness. I don't think that's experienced. I think that's valuing.
Yeah, but I'm with you. But I just imagine myself if I was in a training situation and we're working, and I said I work with teams, and I'm trying to get somebody to get their mind around, so to speak, about the fact that do you get it that you are okay or you are not okay? It is. And I can almost tell you that I can almost see sort of blank eyes say, what are you talking about? I'm not conscious of that thinking. I'm not conscious of that at all. So to a place back, take a few steps back where I can link into what you're saying to me. So in other words, for me, it's the issue of consciousness or consciousness raising, if you will, is part and parcel of this whole idea of actually experiencing me as I'm okay and experiencing you as not okay or okay as well, etc. So I'm just making a point of the issue.
Yeah. No, it's a great point, and I'm going to be thinking about as I dream. I'm sure they're very interesting. Yeah. I don't want to take all the time with this, but thank you for that, and that will be stewing away.
I have another question about the difference between I am and you are, and I'm okay and you're okay, in terms of its implications on maybe experience and behavior. So the first thing that crosses my mind when you're talking about taking away the evaluation and just being I am, is that's kind of like a meditative, that's an experience that I can access through meditation. So it's noticing what's happening without judgment.
Yeah.
I won't say I've achieved that 100%, but can get close. So when we are engaging in real life and we're engaging with other people and their behavior potentially impacts us existentially, so there's perhaps a threat to our health, or we see a threat to somebody else's health, or we see something that's foreign to us culturally, then the evaluation and the concept of okayness comes in. But if we just maintain I am and you are, how does that impact the resulting behavior in a different way to I'm okay and you're okay, or I'm okay and you're not okay, or any of the variations? So what's the practical impact of the difference?
I think, I mean, where I go to is, I was sort of going to give you the backstory, but that might be a bit of a distraction, and I can do. But I think where I go to is greater acceptance of behavior as meaningful. And particularly behavior that we would say is bad behavior or difficult or problematic or challenging or pathological. So, like what's going on underneath the behavior. I think if we take the value judgment out, then it helps me be more accepting of things that I might otherwise be more self-critical, a bit like you're saying, I haven't got to that point of non-judgmentalism about myself, Alex, or Keith or whatever, but I'm trying. And because that's links to the paradoxical theory of change, where if I really accept myself warts and all, then I'm more likely to change. Whereas if I say, oh God, I'm a terrible father because of this, that and the other, and so then I just end up in a downward spiral. Whereas if I go, okay, I think I've become more accepting, and then I can change my behavior. I guess that's where I'm coming from. Alongside that, I have to say, I think we get a bit wishy-washy about, when people say, criticize the biblical thing, love the sinner, not the sin, criticize the behavior, not the person. Well, the problem is, I think with that is from a holistic perspective, we are our behavior. certainly from an organismic perspective, which isn't so big as in TA as it is in person-centered psychology, that makes no sense, because if if when I do that gesture, there's all sorts of other things happening in my body that I'm not conscious of that help me balance and not tip over. So there's an organism. Goldstein, the organismic theorist, talked about that back in the 1930s, and people like Rogers picked that up. So from a holistic perspective, another South African, Smuts, who wrote the book on holism, it makes no sense to divide, an essence from behavior. So, the person who's behaved badly, they are that behavior at that point. So I'm can be quite hard line on, saying I'm non-judgmental, and what you have done. This is way back in previous part of my life where I worked with male perpetrators, and we counsel them and so on. And I was holding a line of, what you did is illegal, and it's a criminal act. I don't need to say you're a bad person for doing it, probably because you think you are anyway, because there's that internalization. But the reality is that, so I can talk about behavior in social terms, but I don't find it very helpful to talk about, to separate behavior from essence, if you like. And so that's also behind, that's part of the backstory, that's partly behind this thing about, if we take away this sort of okayness, not okayness, or at least we take it away as an existential statement, then I think we get to something a bit more interesting. I don't know if that quite answered, but maybe it was sort of going somewhere.
Okay.
Jayashri, yes.
Yeah. I was, what I've been noting down is exactly what you were saying. Many times we use that you are the being is okay, and what you did, the doing is not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel that somewhere again, that is a value judgment. And though I'm saying I am okay and you are okay, but what you did is not okay, it's a value judgment. And I feel that still comes from a one-up position.
Yeah.
I am judging the other person. So the statement, I am, you are. I think that resonates a lot to me by saying there's acceptance. This is me and this is you. So like you were saying, there is no like judging the doing or the being. So there's no pressure for me. I feel that is what I experience. When I say I am okay, you're okay. But there are so many times I don't like what the other person has been doing. And still should I find that other person okay?
And absolutely. And then I think we get into these linguistic and sort of almost emotional tangles. Say, oh, well, I remember my daughter when she lived with us, and she's fairly robust, and she says, no offense, but, and you just know that what's coming after is this huge sort of criticism, and she's going to be very offensive and so on. I don't mean to be critical, but I'm not criticizing you, I'm just criticizing your hand that hit me. It doesn't make any sense. Like, you are critical, you are I work with perpetrators, and I remember, forgive the language, but it's in the context now, saying to people, people say, oh, I'm not really nasty. And I said, well, how would it be to own the nasty bastard that people think you or see you as? And it's like it's much more direct and robust, I think, than sort of getting into, well, I really didn't like your grossly offensive, violent, sexually abusive behavior, but I still love you as a nice human being. And that's the hard one, Whereas if you say, look, you were that behavior, own it, and and maybe then we can get rid of the societal judgment and the internalized judgment and and then get more towards what's happening. I see some nods in the around in the whare, the houses. I sort of, Susan.
Okay. Keith, could I? would it speak to somewhere in, I found it very interesting when you were talking about the life positions being fixed and not fixed, and choice and moment to moment, you know, around script. And so perhaps segueing, perhaps not a direct follow on from the linguistic tangles, but I found that very interesting, and I'm very keen to explore life script being fixed and not fixed, and moment to moment. So giving someone the opportunity to change, or as you're saying, owning a behavior and having a look at, you know, how would it be to own your nastiness?
Yeah.
Would that be, would that give you that opportunity, or would that be looking at those moments of looking at life script?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously this is very much linked with the co-creative work that Graham and I have been doing for it's our 20th anniversary, so it feels very nice to be recognized. And we have a much more fluid take on script, which won't surprise you, you know, and the idea that that script isn't only pathological, so it's always to do with identity, but it's only sometimes self-limiting, and that we can change script in the present. You know, if we have a different new relational possibility, which is a phrase we use, and you experience me differently and I experience you differently from how I might be projecting, or, you know, getting from my script, then at this very moment we're changing script. So we're changing positions, and maybe, and I haven't actually thought about this, but maybe that's part of the what this is critiquing, is this notion of position, because even the idea of a position seems to be too fixed. So thank you for provoking that in me. It's like, yeah, of course, that's part of the problem, is probably I don't believe in positions. You know, it's more, or I don't think in terms of positions, I think more in terms of fluidity, and that also links to co-creative ideas about more fluid ideas about ego state, and particularly the adult ego state. So I agree, it's much more in the moment, moment to moment. I'm very influenced by Daniel Stern's work, and particularly the work towards the end of his life on the present moment, where he analyzed, you know, microsecond interactions, which he saw as sort of vignettes of bigger pictures. So I do think we can do script work, you know, like saying, you can see me as the disapproving father that you had, or we can do something different. Yeah, does that speak to what you're thinking?
Yes, indeed. And you know, just for a moment, being in arts and culture and dealing with real scripts and dialogue, just as you were talking about that moment to moment, the world-renowned celebrated writer Pinter, when unpacking a silence, it was quite an interesting, if I get it right in a nutshell, he wrote silences in his script, and when you're looking at them and investigating them, you don't run over a silence, and there's almost a timing of a silence in his scripts. He was observing from human behavior. But one of the theories around silence was, as opposed to a pause, was you enter the silence in one state, and then there's some transformation and you exit the silence in a different state. So lovely. I don't know. I thought that was quite interesting in terms of script and giving that moment of awareness or realization, or without words.
Yeah. Lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Susan, for that. That's really very descriptive of the process of silence. So that ties into what we were talking about in terms of second by second, by which a person maintains the okayness. And being aware of that in that moment, what Johan was talking about, consciousness, my ability to change that moment. is how I enter and how I get out. It is in that cyclical moment, which Andrew or somebody was referring to, is the feel, think, and do process. And it is done intuitively rather than cognitively.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about silence, like, yeah, when I've gone to meditation, when I'm agitated, I enter into step by step. And then when I come out, I'm in different state. I'm not as agitated as I was about that situation or that meeting or whatever. So that process happens intuitively, that cyclical process of the learning cycle, but it happens at an intuitive level, which comes from my awareness of the moment, which is my ability to change the outcome because of past experience that was where I was uncomfortable. So it's me deciding of my okayness. It may be conditioned by my family and parental figures or societal contract or religious, but in the moment, I am responsible to bring about a different outcome because I was not happy or content or I'd left some residue from the previous moment. So that's the evaluative process that comes to me as you're.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I think that, yeah, that's a lovely segue. I can see the screens the screens lighting up as you talk. And the bit that I would add is that again, influenced by my thinking around co-creativity, that we're not on our own. We're not solely responsible because we change in relationship. So I just wanted to add, it's an and rather than a but. And in terms of, so if you're working, say, with a therapist or a partner, having some interaction, you're affected by the interaction, the relationship. And one of the principles that we put out around, one of the principles of co-creative TA is shared responsibility, that sense of, well, I share responsibility for instance, my engagement with you, my decision whether to respond to you or not, and to add what I'm adding, is part of my responsibility. I'm here too. And the reason we emphasize that is because we were challenging the more individualistic trends or traditions within TA that sort of make either the client totally responsible for all their behavior or the therapist totally responsible for the cure. So we sort of wanted to create that more sense of we-ness.
Thank you, Keith.
Keith,
Andrew's coming in.
I was what I had wanted to add earlier was something around that discussion of how you'd said with in New Zealand with the psychotherapists and not seeing enough Maori representation, and what you was how you're playing with, well, is there a need in all that kind of those question marks. And I've been quite struck. So I remember the first time I think I sat in a webinar with you was last year when you did this with the CTA. And I was profoundly struck with your introduction of yourself. And so there's something about how traditions and language create an experience of life. And I got this slight whisper of a piece of work in my memory of how language impacts our understanding and our experience of life. And at times when I've worked with people that don't have English as a first language, So English is my only language. I can barely speak Afrikaans. And I love getting to work with people where English isn't their first language, because there's something different that happens. And my sense is that there's how other languages create a sentence or a paragraph or a thought mechanism is different to how I might be predestined to do with using English. So then thinking about that and bringing it into okayness and this sense of it is with the TA body of knowledge significantly more weighted towards a Western mindset. But is that because something around the Western, I don't know, histories made life complicated enough to have to like self-complicate on top of things where life actually shouldn't be that complicated? Whereas when you look at the Maori introduction, there's something hugely grounding, there's something hugely reflective, there's a great sense of connectivity and community, and there's a lot of sense that comes out of that. And also sort of reverence and gratitude. And looking at more and more research showing that the route to happiness, whatever happiness might be in that definition at the moment, is around connectivity and gratitude.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. And interestingly, what I presented to you, and I usually sort of add a bit each year, I think, because as I get more confident in my language, and that's the relatively short version. There's a longer version. But as you were talking about that, I realized that I didn't say my name, and that's quite significant because it's the very last thing that people. I've seen that sort of thing take 20 minutes, and at the very end, after you've said the mountain and the river and I might add sometimes my tree and all ancestors, because people can trace their ancestors back. You might say something about each of those ancestors and make those connections. It can go on forever. And then the very last thing you say is, Keith Tudor Tokawingwa, which is my name's Keith Tudor. And interestingly, I often forget to say that because actually by then it's not relevant anymore. I've had people come up to me afterwards and say, "Oh, I lived in Barnsley, which is near the Don." They've heard me in Te Reo Māori, but they've heard the word Don, which is the river, and they make that connection. So it doesn't really matter what your name is, because what matters is all that other stuff. So I think you're right. It is grounding, and it is absolutely connected and about connectivity. Your point about language is, I've actually got another slide, but I think rather than just go offline, because I'm sort of facing you rather than facing the screen, I've got another slide around language, and it was just literally a couple of thoughts, because I am very interested in language, and I do think language, is window to the soul and constructs our thinking even. And to be able to think in another language. I lived in Italy for 2 years in my early 30s, and was then fluent, and it just changed my thinking, because you have to develop a different way of being. Those of you who have 2 or 3 languages, you'll know this well. So I am interested in language, and in terms of the okayness, I have been rereading recently a lovely article by Leonard Campos, who has actually won the Goulding Award this year for social justice, and he'll be part of the awards ceremony. So tanakwa to him. And he wrote a beautiful article in 1980 called "Cure as Finding the Right Metaphor." And I think it's a beautiful statement, that how we cure, or how people cure themselves, is finding the right metaphor. And the reason I'm reminding myself, and by implication reminding you of that, is that that's part of my questioning, my sort of discursive sort of idea about, is okay the right metaphor? the right way of understanding? Is it it's certainly practical enough, but is it subtle enough? That's my question. And the other things that I just wanted to, in a way, put back to you was the because when I do these sort of things, I do look at the titles and I look at the words, and I'm quite careful about that. And I noticed in the headline for the year was this idea of pursuing okayness. Yeah, pursuing okayness in ourselves, for ourselves, and our communities. And I think it's, what's the pursuit? What is it? Is okayness a pursuit? Is it a goal? Is it this teleological sort of thing that we're drawn towards? Is it something that we have to get? Is it a rate? So I was interested in the language that whoever came up with that. I think it's a great title. I'm not criticizing the title, but I am interested in the pursuit. And of course, what are the references to ourselves and the communities? Who are they? And so on. And then the final the riff was about, not okay. So what happens when someone or something is not okay, and we don't want to be particularly, empathic, or we want to get out on the streets and protest against something that's, we don't particularly want to get Donald Trump on the couch. We want to say, no, wrong, stop. We've just had a situation at the university where my ex-boss, actually, I worked with the dean of a faculty, has resigned because of a sexual harassment case. And, there's a lot of upset, there's a lot of protest, there's a lot of people saying, he is not okay. Some people are saying, well, he's still a nice guy, but we don't like his behavior. And so this stuff is very live. And a lot of us are very angry with him and what he did and how he covered it up and how he's affected the lives of many women over many years, and not been at all reflective. And so, yeah, this idea of not okayness is also very live. So I can send you that last. Actually, why don't I'll just put it up so that it's also being recorded. Let me just quickly share it. And I'll just share all 5. So it's just a little riff for you. Share and the reference. So cure is finding the right metaphor. Pursuit, as in pursuing okayness. Who are the ourselves that you're interested in? Who are our communities? What are they or we? And not okay. What happens when something is not okay? So I just wanted to add that to our philosophical and practical considerations. Yeah, back with you. But I particularly like that first one. I think that's in a sense behind all of this. Is okayness still okay?
Keith?
Yes.
So when you're, I was reminded of all the learnings from the Bhagavad Gita. And, there's no concept of this okay and not okayness there. It is about the following that dharma, because it was in the battlefield when Krishna is sharing that knowledge, and that is where Arjuna has this dilemma about whether he's doing is okay, having to kill his closest relatives who are on the other side. And that, I think, that is a beautiful way of explaining. There's nothing like not okay or okay.
Yeah.
It's about the role you're in now, and that is I'm not able to fully put it into words to you. That is where I think there's no judgment there coming in. It's what the person does or how he lives, there is no judgment coming in there. And I'm resonating a lot. I think what you have been putting and saying, he's okay. still okay is something. It's making some connections within me.
Yeah. And it's interesting that some of the connections that you're making are going to text and language in your own culture,
Yes.
which also addresses, Andrew, the other point I wanted to come back to you about is that psychotherapy and TA as we know it is largely predominantly Western. It was created by a particular guy with a particular story in a particular place at a particular time. And I take issue with, because I take issue with universalism, this idea that, there are only 6 drivers and that's all true, or there's only 5 drivers and that's true for all time, and other things, or even 3 ego states. I think that when we shift theory from one culture to another, we need to do so with great caution and I think great humility. So I'm interested in, I've been doing some history and looking at the history of psychotherapy in New Zealand. The first reference, most people date it from 1947 with the foundation of the New Zealand Association of Psychotherapists. My question is, well, who came together to form that foundation? That organisation? There must have been some earlier references. I found a paper reference in 1906. Then we go back to the Treaty of Waitangi, which has ideas about spirit and psyche, but they weren't talking about psychotherapy. And then we go back 7 centuries to when Maori landed. So what was so psychotherapy in New Zealand is, it's like this, it's at 11 o'clock, in the time frame. What happened before then? People were healing the soul, which is what the word means. So I'm interested in what was here first, before necessarily saying, and then saying, well, if, so I've got this history and this training and so on, might this be useful? Or might elements of it be useful? Some of it would be offensive. So even in Western thinking, some of what Byrne talked about, games, his sexism and whatever is offensive. So we have to change. Sure, I think we can do no other. We have to change language. We have to revisit this stuff. And I certainly, coming to a new country and an old country, I'm wanting to know what was here first. I mean, even I had an interesting conversation. I've just had this brainwave of inviting a Maori colleague and a Pacific Island colleague to have a dialogue about criticism, about the nature of criticism, critique. What's critique from a Western perspective and what's critique from a Maori perspective. This is a classic, cultural mistake. So it's a great idea and I want to be engaged, and I've spent 10 years engaging with this particular person and say, would you like to talk about this? And she said, no. And I said, why not? What's the critical tradition in Maori, Te Ao Maori? She said, there isn't one. I said, how do you learn? She said, we ask questions of our elders. Well, first of all, we are taught by our elders, and we might ask questions, but we don't criticize. So there, it's a classic thing. I've got all this training and saying, critical thinking is a great thing, and I still think that in Western terms. And I have to start, and I'm so blown away by this, because we're going to write something about it, but we might write an article about asking questions and criticizing, which will represent both traditions. We won't be writing an article about what is the critical tradition in Maori culture. That's a Western framework on an indigenous tradition, and I think it's a beautiful reminder. I have yet to talk to my Pacific Island colleague. She's going to say something else, so we're going to have fun.
Kit, absolutely right what you said, because I have been raising objection regarding certain, being in the educational field about using the term guru. I think that has really hit me very hard. And using, because in learning imagos, guru has somewhere the essence of it is like, that it's a punitive or a punishing figure. And in India, if you see, how we experience the guru, and you have to see how we wish our teachers, or on Guru Purnami, how we celebrate our teachers. And so, I don't think all that would have been happening if we all perceive the guru as being punitive. So I strongly feel about this, and when communicated, it was also brought to my point that what was mentioned in that is about the Western experience of a guru. So I feel again, they are the self-proclaimed people who went in and they say they are a guru and then they do it. So I feel this is a cultural appropriation
Absolutely, yeah.
and misrepresentation. I think it is important to acknowledge the local culture and I agree with you. Many of the Indians here, I wouldn't even want to do, because I know, I take it very subtle. Sometimes I wouldn't even want to do psychotherapy in the TA framework, because here people love to chant, give them, it gives them a lot of inner strength. So at that moment, what helps them is more, that's more important than trying to teach in the TA language or TA concepts to them. So I feel that that's the delicate balance when we have different cultures. I have benefited from the TA concepts, but I'm going to push it down the other person's throat. So it's at that point I'm seeing that I am whatever I am now. With my cultural background and with my TA training, and you are, that I feel it's a beautiful way of accepting the other person, and because I'm experiencing this with my own sisters, my siblings, and it's been years now I have been in it. I know how it's benefited me, but I still walk with them in that frame of this one. So there's no judgment. They are living. So I think I'm very, very
lovely. Kirsty wants to come in, I think.
Yeah, sorry, Jayshree. I'm just aware of the time, that there's 5 minutes left of our time together. So I don't know, Keith, if you have anything else that you want to kind of end off with before we perhaps check out.
I'm always happy to, well, particularly in the light of the last 5-minute conversation, to go with local culture. So I think if what you do is to find a way of checking, end by checking out, that's a lovely way to do it.
Okay, great. So, well, traditionally when we finish off our webinars, there's space for anybody who wants to, share a reflection or a word or something that sums up their experience. Now's the time to do that.
Time is now.
For me, I just want to thank you, Keith. I enjoyed it. I found the different dimensions of okayness and what hangs together with that, particularly of value. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I've really been taken by the taking up the judgmental part of okayness. I really resonate with the I am, you are, my interest in non-duality, and I've written a bit about that. It's more in alignment. And I was also struck by Paul Drago's comment of planetary okayness, and to flag up that Giles Barrow and his colleague Haley are starting, have written and talking a lot about eco-TA. And how we've got to take and how you introduce yourself about place. I think Giles is getting something back of how can we find our identity first through our place rather than through our humanness and behavior and social interaction.
Yeah. Lovely
Thank
connections.
you. It's been very stimulating.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. I particularly enjoyed the wider context of okayness, how you introduced different thinking on it. And then what's really given me food for thought is removing the evaluative bit or the value judgment of okayness. It's left me with a lot of philosophical questions as well as practical questions. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And as ever, good to hear your sort of philosophical and social input. I was particularly struck by the college example. I'll look that up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith, thank you again. And it's like borrowing Susan's analogy. I came into this meditation with this group of people reflecting and looking at me and the other and the circumstances in between and how I can add value. And so, yeah, you've given me something more to exit from this conversation about I-ness and the other person and the sense of responsibility that I carry. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Keith, for me, I think I was reminded again of why I love TA so much, because it really gives us the opportunity of exploring everything and expanding our minds around absolutely everything, and getting an understanding of things which I haven't experienced in any other theoretical framework, to be quite honest. You know, not that there's anything wrong with any of the others, but this is what I love about TA, is that the freedom that it gives us to have this kind of discussion. And my mind feels expanded by what you've presented this morning. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Sharon. That's great. I think I'm glad that you find that to be the case. I haven't always found that to be the case in TA, and I suppose that's partly why I feel, and partly because of my own background, you know, feel quite fierce about saying, yes, we should be able to be free to think about this, and it's expanding adult and so on. And in the book that I'm trying to finish, hopefully be out next year, I've rediscovered a lot of what Byrne said about being Martian, and some of that has given another layer to that sort of critical thinking, curious, inquiring thing. And so when I come up against the sort of more, you know, rigid thinking in TA, I sort of go, well, Byrne would have liked this, you know. I watched an episode of a lovely English detective series I like called Lewis, and at one point the main character says to his sidekick, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was a bit tough on God," because the protagonist is sort of a bit anti-religious, and he's working with his junior policeman who is religious. So he says, "I'm sorry if I was a bit rough on God," and his sidekick says, "It's all right, he wouldn't mind." And I feel a bit like that with being Martian. It's like, you know, I'm a critical thinker. That's who I am. And actually, Byrne wouldn't have minded.
I think he would have liked it.
Thank you. That's great.
Well, Keith, from myself, it's been such a fascinating conversation to listen to. I didn't participate much because I felt like my biggest takeaway is I've always just had an assumption about what okayness meant and what it means to me. And I hadn't really taken into account that might be different for other people. So it feels a bit like, wow, I can't believe I didn't realize that. So I've just been listening and absorbing and need to go do some of my own reflections. So thank you to everybody who asked such valuable questions, and to Keith for your input and your insights. And also thank you on behalf of the CTA for joining us again this year, and for everybody who's showed up today. It's been a wonderful experience.
Thank you so much. Yes, and so ngā mihi nui kia koutou, a big thank you to you all, and go well. And the way we say goodbye is simply tēnā koutou, there you are, tēnā koutou, there you are, tēnā tātou katoa, there we all are, and that includes me. So it's not just saying goodbye to you, but it's also saying goodbye to you, including me. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. All the very best. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next year, maybe.
For sure. Bye, everyone.
Go well.
Bye, everyone.